That was not a poll, a prediction, or another argument about what Democratic voters might do. It was a result. Wesley Bell defeated Cori Bush in the Democratic primary for Missouri's 1st Congressional District, ending Bush's attempt to reclaim the seat she lost to Bell 2 years ago. For conservatives and America First voters, the immediate takeaway is welcome. One of the most recognizable voices of the squad-style left asked the same district to send her back to Washington, and the voters said no for a second time. Bush did not return quietly. She came back with national attention, a National Democratic Socialists of America endorsement, and a campaign built around the claim that outside money, rather than voter rejection, explained her first defeat. But this was the same district, against the same opponent, with 2 more years to rebuild trust and broaden her coalition. Bell won again. Let us keep the scale of the result honest. Missouri's 1st District is heavily Democratic. Bell is not a Republican, and St. Louis did not suddenly become MAGA country. This was not a conservative takeover. It was still a direct test of whether Democratic voters wanted Cori Bush's political brand restored to Congress. They did not. Bell emphasized local service, legislative work, and a more pragmatic public image. Bush emphasized movement politics, confrontation, and the promise that her earlier loss had only made her stronger. Voters had already watched both candidates operate in public life. Their second verdict was more meaningful than any campaign slogan. That matters to the right, because the strongest America First argument is ultimately a results argument. Voters are entitled to ask what a politician actually delivered, whether government is serving citizens, and whether ideological performance has replaced practical work. President Trump's movement is strongest when it keeps that contrast clear. Outcomes over activist approval, national interest over political theater. But conservatives should not make the opposite mistake and declare the entire progressive left dead because one famous candidate lost. Missouri proves that Bush could not reconstruct a winning coalition in her old district. It does not prove that the organizations behind her have disappeared. The phrase, "be afraid," transforms a personal election loss into a larger movement story. It gives supporters a villain, keeps the anger alive, and promises that defeat is only temporary. But anger is not persuasion. It can energize voters who already agree with you while pushing away the people you need to win back. Bush received the rematch she demanded. The district had 2 years to decide whether her warning became effective organization, whether her coalition expanded, and whether she had made a stronger case for returning to Congress. Bell still won. Outside spending belongs in the analysis. Bell again benefited from major pro-Israel support, and Bush made that spending central to her explanation of both races. Money influences which messages dominate television, mailboxes, and social media. But money does not physically cast the ballots. The most credible conclusion is that outside spending shaped the information environment while voters still made the final decision. Here on America First TV, we do not need to erase either side of that fact. Conservatives do not have to pretend campaign money has no influence. And the left does not get to pretend voters had no agency. Factual discipline makes a right-leaning argument stronger, not weaker. Now comes the warning from Michigan. The progressive left is not simply disappearing. It is changing candidates, changing presentation, and testing where its message can travel. The Associated Press called the Democratic Senate primary for Abdul El-Sayed after he narrowly defeated Representative Haley Stevens. That result matters because Michigan is not merely another safe blue state. It voted for Donald Trump again in 2024, and it remains central to the national balance of power. Yet Democratic primary voters selected a progressive Senate nominee over the establishment-backed alternative. That does not mean Michigan as a whole suddenly moved left. A party primary is not a general election, and El-Sayed still has to face Republican Mike Rogers in November. But it does mean the Trump coalition cannot treat the socialist and progressive wings as spent forces. On the same election night that Bush failed in Missouri, the left captured a statewide nomination in a battleground state. For America First voters, the correct response is not panic, and it is not complacency. It is attention. The left lost one recognizable messenger, then advanced with a different one on more competitive terrain. The result does not erase how divided the Democratic vote was. El-Sayed won, but it was a narrow victory over Haley Stevens, not an effortless ideological sweep. The progressive wing proved it can win a statewide Democratic primary while the party remains divided. That makes the Missouri contrast sharper. Cori Bush's confrontational comeback failed. A different progressive candidate, using a different coalition and a more disciplined campaign, succeeded. Hamtramck, Lansing, and East Lansing. The monitoring was real and announced. The department said it was intended to promote transparency and compliance with federal voting rights laws. Conservatives are right to demand transparent elections and investigation when evidence supports it. But monitoring alone is not proof that fraud occurred. America First TV should not turn election monitors into a conclusion the evidence does not establish. We can support election integrity without weakening our credibility through speculation. There is another correction involving Michigan's 7th Congressional District. William Lawrence is a progressive activist, a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, and a candidate backed by Senator Bernie Sanders. He won the Democratic primary and will face Republican incumbent Tom Barrett. But the National DSA did not list Lawrence among its nationally endorsed candidates. The precise statement is that he was not a National DSA endorsee. That does not make his victory less important. Michigan's 7th is competitive. Lawrence now gets to test whether movement-style progressive politics can capture a swing seat, while Barrett can force a direct comparison between their records and governing priorities. Hassan Piker's appearance at El Sayed's event is relevant as political optics. It tells voters something about the campaign environment. It does not prove that every El Sayed voter agrees with every position Piker has taken. The right does not need to exaggerate the connection. Showing it accurately is enough. So what was the real verdict? Missouri rejected Cori Bush's return and defeated a DSA-endorsed candidate. Michigan nominated El Sayed for the Senate, and Lawrence for a competitive House district. This was not a nationwide socialist collapse. It was an internal Democratic battle in which the activist left lost one major contest and won others. From an America First perspective, Missouri is good news and Michigan is a warning. The progressive wing can replace an unpopular messenger without abandoning the larger movement. Republicans cannot rely on the word socialist as though the label will campaign by itself. They have to show voters what the candidates propose, what those policies would cost, and how the alternative would affect families, workers, public safety, energy, and national sovereignty. That is where President Trump and the America First coalition have the stronger argument when they remain focused. The administration's stated priorities emphasize American energy, lower cost pressure, secure borders, trade that benefits American workers, domestic industry, and accountable government. Those concrete contrasts are stronger than unsupported claims or premature celebration. This channel should be openly right-leaning without becoming careless. We can support President Trump, defend America First priorities, and still correct claims made by people on our own side. That makes the commentary harder to dismiss. Cori Bush lost again. Good. But the progressive left did not surrender. It changed faces, shifted battlegrounds, and kept moving. For Trump supporters, the lesson is simple. Take the Missouri victory, study the Michigan warning, and make the November choice unmistakable. Which result matters more for November? Bush losing the Missouri rematch, or progressives advancing in Michigan?